Kia ora koutou, it's Ekant here again. And last week, the New Brighton Photographic Club had asked me to give a talk at their meeting about how I take my photos, the inspiration behind them, the methods I use. And it was quite exciting because even though I'm an associate professor at the University of Canterbury, I talk for a living. This is kind of what I do. I'd actually never done a photography talk before. So I was more than happy to go out and chat to people. And we had quite a few people turn up. It was quite cool to see so many people come and listen to me and what I've got to say about my photography, but there were a few people who couldn't make it on the night, and they had asked if I could put together a summary of the sort of things I was going to talk about. And so that's what this video is about. It's just a summary of what I spoke about that night, and hopefully it's going to give you guys some ideas on how I take my photos, why I take them the way I do, and the sort of inspiration behind them. And I've titled this a selfish shoot, and I'll talk about why I've called it myself a selfish shooter in a second, but that's the title of this talk. To start with, they gave me a very open brief. They said, just talk about whatever, talk about inspiration, talk about your methods or something like that. So I kind of fuddled my way through with regards to what to talk about, and hopefully it comes across. And we finished with some pretty cool questions. I think we went on for about an hour and a half in total, the talk. Just lots of people asking questions. And it was great to see so many people passionate about this and making good friends and new friends with people in the audience as well as seeing old friends turn up from the region who like to take photos. So it was cool to do that. So let me start by saying I did not make this a gear talk. This is not a gear talk. I do not care what camera you shoot on. I don't care if you've got an iPhone or a DSLR. I don't care if you've got a Sony, a Canon, a Nikon, whatever. Frankly, the best camera is the one you've got on you. If you have an iPhone on you and you don't have a DSLR, guess which one is the better camera? It's going to be the iPhone. So when I talk about developing your structure, developing your photography, the first thing you have to develop is your eye. If you do not have a good eye, then no amount of gear is going to fix that. If you do not have a good idea of composition, some of those, the training that goes along with basic photography, the idea about capturing the light, the idea about capturing those important moments in time, it's going to be impossible to make anything look good. So that's where you should focus. My 9-year-old has an amazing eye, and she is going to be a fantastic photographer. She just uses a point and shoot, and some of the photos she takes, even when she was a 3 or 4-year-old, are amazing. And I really want to encourage people to focus more on developing their eye rather than their gear. Don't even get into that argument about which camera is the best camera. The best camera is the one you've got on you at the time. So why do I call myself a selfish shooter? Well, primarily I take photos for me. I am very selfish about the types of photos I take and where I take my photos, when I take my photos. I do not make a living off my photography. I make less than, I think, 1% of my income from photography. This is a hobby. This is something that keeps me sane after a day's work and things like that. And so I have the privilege of being able to say, I will take the photos I want to take. I shoot for me first, and I enjoy taking photos. And if I like a photo, if I like what's happened, then that's all that matters. If other people like it as well, awesome. I always encourage people to take criticism, take critique, learn from people who are better than you, learn from people that inspire you. Absolutely, but don't get sucked into fads. Don't feel like you have to abide by a certain trend or something like that. Ignore all that, move on. And focus on what you think is important. Now, I should say that once I've taken the photo I think I like, I'm more than happy to share it with other people. Like I said, I don't make a living out of this. I'm quite happy for my photos to be seen online. If someone starts profiting off my photos, then I get a little bit peeved and I might chase them up. But to be honest, if people share this online, if people see it online and people say they like the photo, then that's great as well. Let me give you an example. So at the end of last year, I took about 100 of my photos that I'd taken over the last few years, and I just uploaded them all onto Reddit. And I gave them for the R New Zealand sub, their group that's been supporting me for many years with my photography. And I just said, this is my present to you. This is my Christmas present to you. I want you to have all of these photos. And I kind of composed them in a portrait format so people can use it on their phones and things like that. It was just my way of giving back to the group. Now, I'm sure some people get annoyed at me for doing this, that I'm giving away my photos for free. I should be charging them. Again, I want people to see my work. I don't care about making money from my work. So underpinning my photography is a belief that if I enjoy what I'm doing, then I'll keep doing it. And I don't necessarily need money to feel that enjoyment. If anything, if I started charging for my work, or if I started feeling like I had to do a certain piece of work in order to get paid, I'll probably end up enjoying it less. It becomes more like work. I would rather this be about relaxation, about creativity, about what I want to do. So I at the moment in my life, I'm quite happy for people to see my work, and if people are going to profit from it, that's a different thing. But for now, quite happy with that. But do I have a method? Am I just going out there willy-nilly, just taking photos and hoping they turn out? Well, that's not really the case. I am quite methodical about what I do. I start by knowing my passion. In this case, I'm going to talk primarily about landscape photography. It's what I'm most passionate about at the moment. Now, I've gone through a few phases in my photography walk, and I've tried different ways of taking photos of different subjects, but landscape is where I'm at the moment. Living in New Zealand, it kind of helps that you live in such a magical place that you can take photos. I know my limits and know my strengths. I want to see what I can work with, work to expand my strengths, work to bolster myself with my strengths. Also know my limits. I really do not like being under pressure. I don't like being forced into taking a photo in an instant moment, which is kind of why I like landscape. I've got a bit more time to breathe, to focus, to decide what the composition is like. As a result, I've had people ask me, could you take my wedding photos? Could you shoot my wedding and stuff like that? And I've always refused. I've never actually shot a wedding, and I don't really want to, because the pressure of taking and capturing a moment and missing it, I would feel so bad for the groom and the bride if I had not captured that special moment. So I generally don't do that sort of thing. But I'm always looking to improve, and the way I typically do this is I set myself goals each year. So in 2013, I purposely went out to decide I'm going to shoot more. I'm going to go out and take more photos, even be just opportunistic and take photos. 2014 was when I really started to learn astrophotography, and you'll see a few of my shots today are going to be focused on astro. 2015, there was a change in what I did, and rather than being opportunistic and just going out and hoping for the best, I became more planned. I started using different tools to find out where the light will be, where the Milky Way would be, where different things will be, and I try to plan myself a bit more. 2016, I wanted to focus much more on teaching, sharing my knowledge the best I can. And this year, 2017, has been primarily focused on light. I mean, if you don't understand light, if you don't know how to use light, then photography becomes pretty useless. And this was something that I think I wanted to expand upon. So every shot I've taken this year, I've gone out purposely to say, how can I understand the light better? How can I exploit the light better? Today I want to talk about 3 of these in particular, and I'll present 3 photos which I want to dissect with you. And they kind of relate to at least 2 of each of these. One of them is not an astro shot, but they all pick up on being planned and focusing on understanding light. So let's start with this first one. And this first one was based on the aurora that hit about 6 weeks ago now. So this is a photo I took when the aurora hit. This is from a little place called Birdlings Flat, which is just south of where I live. It's about 40 minutes drive from my house. Everything seemed to work. We got this beautiful array of light, this sort of golden crowning effect of the aurora. On the left-hand side as well, you can see we've got the Milky Way. You've got the galactic core rising there, Milky Way rising here. We've got the Large Magellanic Cloud. The small one is so small and so washed out from the aurora. It should be around here, but you can't see it. It was nice to get this nice panorama. Now what I've done, I've actually gone and put a nice little transition from left to right on this. So I'll play that and then we'll come back and talk about it. So I'm just going to silently let that play and then we'll talk. Cool. So giving a little bit more detail, focusing a little bit closer, you can see some of the different elements of the shot, but as a whole is where I really want to start. Now, some of you will have heard of the rule of thirds, which says, you know, each third has to have some interesting part and make sure you balance it out with thirds. I don't really like anything that's called a rule. I think they can be really good guidelines, but I don't really abide by rules generally. And you can see that here in that the horizon here is at bottom, maybe a quarter, not a third by any means. Had there been more of that, the ground there, I don't think it would be as interesting. We would have missed some of the top here. The aurora takes up about a half. Maybe it would have been better if I'd balanced it a bit more, but then I would have missed out a little bit of the Milky Way. So all these elements are in different parts of the shot, and rather than going from a top left to bottom right, which is typically how people read in the Western world, going top left, bottom right, this photo kind of starts in the middle and it kind of emanates outwards, and that sort of emanation from the middle outwards I think gives a bit more of an interesting feel. And then as people stop and reflect, more and more of the image in my mind starts to pop out. So we have the Milky Way here, which I don't think people catch first time. The first time you see it is all this color in the middle, this dynamism there, and then these sorts of things on the left. This is not an opportunistic shot. This was purposely planned. I looked at the aurora forecast and I saw that it was going to be big. I didn't realize how big it was going to be. This is probably the biggest I've ever seen myself, but it was going to be big. So now I wanted to see how can I compose this shot in a way that's going to help me to capture more than one element. Getting the aurora on its own is cool, and if you haven't done that, go and do it. But I'd done that before, so I wanted to get something a little different. I wanted to get that Milky Way rising, so I looked up on Photographer's Ephemeris, and I saw that the Milky Way was going to be rising around 9 p.m. that night, so it would be rising in the south-southeast sort of area, so I wanted to get in a place where I could see the core rising, but I could also see southerly down here to get the aurora. That wasn't going to happen in Banks Peninsula, which is over this way, I guess, in the shot. So I had to come down Birdlings Flat, and I measured out on the map exactly how far I needed to go down in order to get the aurora and the Milky Way rising at the same time. Next thing, I had to check the weather forecast. Next thing, I had to make sure I had time free. I didn't have work the next day, so I could drive out. All these other things that were planned purposefully to try and capture all these elements. No doubt, if I was lucky, I could get to this spot, and a lot of people have come to the spot and got a similar shot, which is great. But I don't think I would have captured it in that way had I not planned it out. The next thing is balancing out the light. Now, with an aurora, it is this weird sort of experience where you've got so much light coming from the aurora and then so little light from other elements. So Antares here is probably the brightest star in the sky at the time. There's a few other bright stars around. When you look at how bright these stars are compared to the brightness of the aurora, it's like having a city lights there just washing out the sky. So I had to find a way that I can balance this all out, and the way that I did this is by taking multiple shots and then taking those and then stitching it together later. And you can check out my video on how to stitch up astro shots if you want. So in total, I think this was 15 shots. So I think 5 across and then 3 down, all taken on a 24mm focal length and then stitched together. So this in its entirety, I think takes up about 180 degrees worth of field of view that I'd taken. Quite a difficult thing to do, especially in the cold and the dark, but it seemed to have worked out well, and I like it. There are many things I would do differently. I look at this and I kind of see the stitches kind of messed up here, I kind of see the chromatic aberration is kind of messed up here. But as a photo, especially if I'm just going to share it on Facebook or something like that, not too bad. It actually got shared quite a few times, this one, and as a result we had a lot of people heading down to the same location the day after to try and see the aurora to see if it'll happen. There was quite a bit of fog out that night, so people were a bit hard done by, unfortunately. One person did come to me and said they loved it so much they asked if they could have a print of this, and so it's quite cool to see that this is now hanging in a client's house, and they've got a copy of this. And it's always good when not only do I manage to give this to someone that that they can take a look at it and hang it up, but also that they send me a photo to see how this looks in their house, and that's pretty cool. I'm quite happy about that. So the next one I want to talk about, oh actually no, this is time-lapse. Let me show you this. This is a time-lapse from the same night, so I'll play this quickly so you can see how the aurora bounces around in the evening. So you can see it started off a bit slow and I thought this was going to be a washout completely, and then suddenly it all explodes. This was around, I think, about 9:30, just as the Milky Way, the core, of the Milky Way was rising. So it all kind of worked out together. I can be as planned as I want, but if it would have been cloudy that night, if I planned all I want, and if the aurora hadn't happened, no point in turning up. So you've got to be a little opportunistic. This is the next photo I want to talk about, and again this combines the idea of taking astro shots, understanding light, and some planning. And this is called Shag Rock or Shag Pile after the earthquakes that hit Christchurch. I actually prefer the Māori name, which is Rapa Nui Rock. And so I wanted to get this photo of Rapa Nui Rock with the Milky Way rising behind it. Now again, I could take a photo of the Milky Way anywhere in the world and I can Photoshop it into this photo. That's, in my mind, not what I want to do. If other people want to do it, fantastic, great. It is not who I am, it's not what I want to do. I want to make sure that I can capture this all at the same time. Now this is a fake photo and I'll talk about why this is a fake photo in a second. But let's do the same sort of thing. Let's see if we can guide us through this shot. Okay, cool. So, like with my previous shot, let me go back so you can see the whole thing. Like with my previous shot, the rule of thirds just out the window completely with this one. Again, Rapa Nui Rock itself is down to a quarter, maybe a fifth of the bottom there. And then most of the sky is Milky Way. It's not composition in the composed in the traditional sense, and that's okay. If you like it, that's okay. So why did I fake this shot? Well, this was all shot in the same location at the same time of night, but I actually merged a couple of photos together. So this location is right on the edge of one of the main roads, and that main road had a lot of lights from the highway, had a lot of light pollution from the street lamps and everything like that. And so if I was going to use one shot for the whole exposure, for the whole image, then it's going to be completely washed out in the sky. So what I did is that I took the foreground shot in one photo and then took multiple shots of the Milky Way together in a different photo. And then I was able to merge them together. So this is the composition. This is how it looked at the time, but the foreground and the background are separate. It also meant that I can adjust the focus. So the focus on the foreground is sharp, the focus on the background is sharp as well. Something you can't do sometimes if you've got a situation where the foreground is very close to you, you're using like f1.4 or something like that, then the depth of field is going to be so shallow that you are going to have things that are out of focus. I took this all on a 55mm lens and I shot it all at, the sky was shot at f2. And the foreground was shot at f7. That gives a much crisper foreground. It also means that I was able to compensate for the excessive light. When you're using a 55mm lens, even in a light polluted area, you can block out all that light by having the focus on the dark areas. So if I was using this on a, let's say, a 24 or a 14mm lens, any sort of light pollution that is on the edge of that screen is just going to flood in from the side. So using a much tighter crop with regards to the 55mm lens means I can focus on the dark areas, and then the light pollution which might be to the sides doesn't influence it as much. It still influences it and you still got to compensate for that, but it's much better. So this is actually 4 shots. I think it's 4 shots, yeah. So 1 at the top, 2 in the middle, 3 down here, and then 4 was the foreground. So I was able to merge those together, each one taken with the same camera, same time, same focal length, just different settings for the foreground compared to the background. So hopefully that makes it clear as to how I did this. Okay, let's talk about the last one. Let's move on. Now this is not an astro shot, but it does involve planning, and it did involve light in particular. I had been planning the shot maybe about 3 or 4 months. This is New Brighton Pier. It is a beautiful pier that kind of juts out into the sea at New Brighton in Christchurch. And I looked on Photographer's Ephemeris over Christmas time, and I kind of looked at when are the sort of key points where things are going to line up. When is the Milky Way going to line up with Rapa Nui like in the last shot? And I thought, I wonder when the sun is going to line up with the pier itself. So We know the sun rises to the east, but it kind of moves along the horizon from north to south. And this day, the sun was going to rise exactly to the east of the pier. And so I planned to get this shot where I can look down the pier, have the sun rising in the horizon, and see if I can capture all those things. Now, it started off as a beautiful day. Let me show you what it started off. So this is about half an hour before sunrise. And we had these beautiful blue-out clouds, the sort of pinks and purples, and the sort of crispness in the horizon. And we had these kind of waves over here, these of waves of fog and sea mist coming over. There were a few people on the pier, and that added to what I thought was quite a cool little shot. This was a panorama again. I think this is 5 shots done vertically and then stitched together, but it was all looking good. However, come actual sunrise time, the fog came just at the wrong time, and it flooded the front of the pier, and so I just got the sun peeking up over the top rather than having it this crisp sun with nothing obstructing it. But it still ended up in a decent shot. Let me show you this time lapse of the morning, and so you can see how the fog kind of rolls in from the left, and so you can see how it worked and how it kind of influenced the final sunrise. There it is, that last little bit of fog just flooded the front of the pier, and the shot that I wanted just was a little bit more abstracted. But I thought, well, let's play to this. Let's play to the strengths we've got. Let's work it out, and let's see if I can exploit this fog. And I took this one in the end, which made it a bit more of an eerie sort of look. Now, this is again a faked shot, and I'll talk about why it's faked in a second. Let's go with a bottom to top look again. So starting at the bottom, again, this is probably the shot, let's go back, the shot that probably abides by the rule of thirds more than any of the others that I've shown you today. So a third is the pier, blue sky at the top, oranges in the middle, and then these sort of leading lines from these lights there. So I'll show you now. Let's go to bottom to top. Okay. So why do I say this is a fake shot? Well, this is another fake shot because if you've ever been to New Brighton Pier in Christchurch, you will know that all the way down there are these little benches and bins just to try and help people to put their rubbish in the bins. There was actually one right here, right smack in the middle, and it was really obstructing the view. Now, the way I saw this shot, you started at the bottom and it builds up through the middle. And so when I had a bin right in the middle at the bottom, that was too distracting. So I cloned that out straight away. Another thing, and you'll see it in this photo, if I go back, one of the lights is actually not a light. It is a little wind gauge, and it will tell how fast the wind is, and it measures that. And it's quite cool as far as a piece of meteorology goes. It, for me, was a little distracting. So I went and picked up one of the other pier lights and stuck it forward. Now, some people who know the pier kind of go, why have you done that? That's stupid. You've gone and, put something that's not there. I felt that it was a little bit too distracting, especially if I'm building from the bottom up, to suddenly be halted or obstructed by something and go, why is that there? So people who know think it's cool. People who don't know that that's meant to be a wind gauge probably would have been, in my mind, a bit distracted. Now, one thing I should say, I do not like to light paint. I do not like to manually paint colors in there. These are the natural colors. I have adjusted the vibrancy, I have brought out the colors in various ways, but I haven't gone and painted blue up here and then yellow in the middle. It just wouldn't have worked. And again, this is now hanging. This is actually in my auntie's house. She asked for a copy of this, so I sent her the print for this, and she has that now hanging in her house. So it's pretty cool to see that hanging in people's homes. So I guess as part of a summary, I like to take photos for me. They are for me first, and if other people like them afterwards, awesome. That makes me feel good, but that's not the motivation behind why I take photos. I am hypercritical of almost every element of every photo I take, and being a photographer doesn't necessarily just mean taking a great photo. It means processing in a way that makes you feel proud of that photo as well. It also means knowing that there are times where things aren't going to work the way you want, and it's okay to work to that, or it's okay to throw it out and try it again another day. There have been plenty of times I've been back from a long shoot and I've just deleted my whole SD card after looking at it. It's just no point. I just don't like them enough to share them with anyone. This is an example of a photo that I took a couple of years ago. I was flying up to Auckland from Christchurch, and this is Mount Taranaki, and I was on a window seat, and I knew the sunrise was going to happen at a certain point. What I didn't know is that the clouds were going to give this shape, that there was going to be this beautiful cloud cast through this way, and it all seemed to work. But all I see when I see this photo are the elements I don't like. I'm not going to point them out to you because I want you to like the photo, but I don't like elements of this photo. It's grainy and everything. But anyway, this got shared by the airline, and it got plenty of people saying positive things about it, but as a photo, I actually don't like it, so I don't share it to too many people anymore, but other people seem to like it. I do as much of my work in camera as possible, but post-processing is still an essential aspect of digital photography, especially if you're doing astro. So post-processing still matters. So please don't say, I only take photos and I share them straight off the camera because that is pure photography. That's fine. It's okay if you believe that, but don't feel that other people are somehow inferior as a result because they, like I do, clone out elements that I think are distracting, or I adjust things. When you go and take a moon and you expand it to 500 times its size and slap it into a Milky Way, then you're faking things. It just seems a bit silly. Don't ever put a moon in front of clouds or anything like that. It just doesn't make sense. But adjusting your photo and adapting it and processing it is a part of what we do as photographers. This is an example of a photo I took a few weeks back as well. It was during the Ato Aquariid meteor shower, and I planned it in advance. This was going to be a meetup at sunrise with some other photographers in the area. So I looked on Photographers Ephemeris and I saw the Milky Way was going to be arching over Gibraltar Rock in this case here, and so I wanted to get that feel of the Milky Way arching over, and I was lucky enough to capture a meteor striking through it as well. That was just pure luck. It was not something that was planned. It's not something I photoshopped in afterwards. It was just luck, and sometimes photography is just lucky, especially when dealing with nature. As we saw with the fog one earlier, sometimes you just get lucky and it works. In this case, it just worked. But I could not have taken this photo and taken it straight off the camera and posted it to you. Not only is this a stitch of multiple photos, again, that's how you get that arcing effect of the Milky Way when you've taken a panorama, but also there's so much light pollution. This is light pollution from Christchurch, this is light pollution from Ashburton, this is light pollution from Rolleston. All the other settlements around here just washed out this horizon. And so I had to bring down the highlights here, and then this was quite dark, so I had to bring up the highlights here. You have to adjust it to make it work for you. Other aspects, there's quite a lot of air glow in this photo as well, and I know some people love to exacerbate the air glow. I actually reduced the saturation in this photo because I thought the air glow was a bit distracting. I wanted people to focus on the rock and on the meteor up there and the Milky Way. Anything else on the horizon was going to kind of drag people's eyes away in my mind, but there's still plenty in this photo which I kind of like. Again, some people do, some people don't. Perfectly fine. I could give this photo to a dozen people, and a dozen people would go and process it completely differently. As long as you like what you're doing, I think I'm okay with it. I plan as much as I can, but I'm also still very opportunistic. One of my mates, Dave, took me out fishing one morning, and I caught absolutely nothing, but I did see the sun rising in the lure that I was using, and so I pulled out my camera. I always have my little camera with me. I pulled out my camera and took a photo. So while everyone else is still trying to take photos of the trying to catch fish, there's me hanging up this my rod and reel and trying to take a photo of it. People thought I was mad, but that's okay. You know, I quite like this photo. No one else seems to like this photo, but the story behind it is quite cute. I didn't catch anything that morning. Quite disappointed. Dave caught something. And then understanding light in my mind is vital. If you don't have an appreciation or an understanding of light, you're going to really struggle as a photographer. And that means understanding how light affects your shot, how light impacts your photography, and how our dynamic range in our eyes is going to be very different from a lot of the sensors that are out there. I don't know if there is a sensor that has a dynamic range as powerful as the human eye. And as such, we get shots that we take a photo and go, that's not what I saw. I wanted to see something else. So understanding light, how it affects your shot, is very, very important. I'll finish with another shot of New Brighton Pier. This is what it looks like when you're not on the pier, but from the side. And I had planned this one in advance. Again, I knew that the sun was going to be rising from this angle, so I had to stand in the car park in this space, and then I could all match it up together. I purposely wanted to have that silhouetted effect of the pier. But other people might want to have more definition, more color in the pier. So you will need to find other ways to ramp up the shadows in this, ramp down the highlights, because if you overexpose it, blah, 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 it's not going to be a great shot. So understanding your camera, using it in a way that's going to provide you with the best light and to reflect the shot you really want, is probably the best bet you have going forward. So hopefully that's been useful, hopefully that's been insightful, hopefully more than anything it's been inspirational. Hopefully you understand that even idiots like me can go out and take photos, so if I can do it, then definitely anyone else can do it. But please do leave some questions, critiques, comments, and everything else in the comments section. I'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. All right, kia ora.